Started back channel with Annie. Oh, there we go. Now we are live. So people are seeing how the sausage is made. Welcome, everyone, today. It is Juneteenth. Thank you for joining us. I'm so glad that many of you can come from around the world to participate in our Roots Tech by Juneteenth live event with free online classes. We've got 6 classes today. We've done 2 already. If you've missed them, it's okay. They'll be available to watch after. But we are just about to jump in from Ollie to Clay, taking the family narrative to DNA. And I've got an illustrious panel of hosts who I will introduce in just a moment. But I want to thank you for joining us and let you know that this month, Family Search is devoted to diversity and inclusion and really trying to tell the story of strength and resilience and the triumphs of the African American community throughout history. And that's why we're celebrating Juneteenth. But we're also making content, not just that's available today from the live content that you'll watch, but also content that we've had from Roots Techs in the past. Donald and Sherry have been on Roots Techs in the past, and their classes are available on rootstech.org. So if you want to go to rootstech.org and you want to search for African American family history, you can create your own playlist and you can watch a webinar each day for the rest of this month and truly learn what it takes to be successful in African American genealogy. There's a lot of myths out there, and we're going to do a bit of myth busting a little bit today, a little sleuthing and detective work as we talk about DNA, and because our classes all through today and throughout what we've done on Roots Tech in the past have addressed all the things that you need to know about getting started, about helpful resources, about overcoming genealogical hurdles, about using DNA for testing in African American genealogy and accessing lesser known records. We know that as you spend the time with us today and as you go on Roots Tech, that you're going to gain valuable knowledge that's going to help for joyful discoveries of your family. And so we're so grateful to bring this to you. My name is Tom Reed. I'm a program manager for Family Search International. I've been with them for 10 years. I can't believe it. It has been an amazing journey to get to know so many in the African American genealogy community and to help those who have African roots make that connection with their families. So I'm grateful to be the host of today's session. I'm joined, as you see on the screen, a good group of individuals that'll be joining me. I will just kind of introduce them, but they will all have a chance to speak and talk to you. Keith Winstead. Keith, you want to wave to the crowd so they know exactly who you are? All right, Keith. He's a genealogist from Louisville, Kentucky, who's been kind of the ringleader of this effort of what we're going to talk about today, scouring the Clay cousins ranks and to gather as much spit as possible. Yes, spit. This is how we do DNA for testing and gathering the family documentation to track the original story elements of what we're going to talk about today. Donald Shores, will you wave? I know you're on your phone. Thank you. Coming to us from Missouri, the 2023 Roots Tech speaker, genealogist, and descendant of one of Henry Clay's enslaved women. He's been working with Keith for years to kind of sort out the pedigrees, connections, and DNA testers associated with this. We've got Sherry Daniels. Sherry, say hi. The Director of Library and Archives for the National Society of the Sons of the American Revolution in Louisville, Kentucky. Sherry has been involved with Roots Tech as a speaker for several years, including 2023. She's a genealogist, author, historian, and former TV producer who's been working with Donald and Keith for years to organize the research and the testing results and the script for an upcoming media project. So I'm excited of where this project's going to go. We've got Eric Brooks. Eric, will you raise your hand? Coming to us, we got a lot of Kentucky in the house. He's coming to us also from Lexington, Kentucky. He is the curator for Ashland, the Henry Clay Estate. And Eric has been providing in-depth research and documentation for Henry Clay's life, as well as for the lives of those that he enslaved. And finally, we've got Sherman McRae coming to us, not from Kentucky, but from Houston, Texas, H-Town. He's the group's product liaison for Family Tree DNA. Sherman's also a 2023 Roots Tech speaker. Got to see him at Roots Tech in person. and he provides valuable insight into the type of research challenged with his specialty in African American DNA and heritage. So glad to have all of you. I'm so glad that the technology is working. Donald's on. And so I'm going to actually pass the buck over to Sherry, who's going to tell our audience about this incredible project and the work that you all are involved in.
All right. Thank you, Tom. Can everybody hear me okay? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. It's such an honor to be here today to discuss this amazing project. As Tom mentioned, I'm coming to you from the national headquarters of the Sons of the American Revolution in Louisville, Kentucky. And in many ways, this is where much of the story begins. I'm sure our viewers are really familiar with Muhammad Ali. He's the GOAT of boxing champions. He even said he was the greatest. And that still rings true in the 21st century. But many of you may not know that he was a Kentucky boy, born and raised right here in Louisville. And his legend lives on in great ways here in his hometown. Tom, if you've got that one, if you wanted to share that one picture that I sent you.
Give me a moment to grab it. Sorry.
Right, you're fine. I'm going to show you just a couple of pics that demonstrate his prominence in our fair city. Couple that I actually snapped this morning on the way into town in the rain, but it's so quick. You cannot arrive in Louisville without seeing Muhammad Ali. He's prominent. He's in many places as you turn here in town. And in fact, the first one that he's going to show you greets you right as you come off the expressway, as you're coming in.
It takes a couple of seconds. Sorry for it to come up here. Hopefully it's coming up. I've got it presenting, but I don't think it's in the broadcast yet. So
okay. All right.
Can we see it, Annie or Aaron? Can you make sure that this picture comes up that I'm presenting? There we go.
There we go. There we go. Yes, that's one of the hometown heroes banners that's right there in Louisville, Kentucky, as you come off the expressway. And so, there he is, his face. He's welcoming you as people arrive in his hometown. So that's one. And then right down from us, actually at the SAR headquarters, the other one there, if I kind of stretch outside my office window just a little bit, I can see the Muhammad Ali Center, which is only about a block and a half away from me. So that right there, I also snapped that on the way in looking past we park over that section, and I can see the Muhammad Ali Center. If you see, there's a little mosaic. That side of the building is actually a mosaic, and you can kind of see his face in many, you can see multiple versions of his face on the side of that building if you look really close.
That is interesting. I didn't catch that.
Did you see that? Right.
I hope those that are tuning in. We've got folks tuning in from Jordan in the Middle East. We've got people from all over the world that are watching this and are probably familiar with the greatest of all times, Muhammad Ali. And probably interested in that story, and so hopefully they'll be able to see this. And we love to go online and look at what you can and see what you can in Louisville for Muhammad Ali. We've got a few of the folks that are commenting who are cousins of Ali as well. So this story is going to ring true for them today.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And actually right down from that building that you just saw, there's even another statue of him. So he is well represented here, and he's obviously very loved in Louisville. And so back to another piece of trivia that's very important for as we talk about Muhammad Ali. Many of the younger audience members out there may not know that Muhammad Ali's original name by birth was Cassius Clay. And he came from a long line of African-American clay men, including his father, who bore the same name. As he became more famous throughout his boxing career, journalists began asking him about his origins. And in the 1980s, they interviewed one of his family members who stated that their branch of the Clay family was directly descended from Senator Henry Clay, which connects Ali to another highly famous historic person. We have an expert here that'll tell you a whole lot more about Henry Clay in just a few minutes. But as a well-known statesman of the antebellum period, his statue stands in the Federal Capitol building in Washington, D.C. At one point in his life, Muhammad Ali loved this name, Cassius Clay, and told journalists and fans to repeat it. And he wanted to be known by that name. And he expressed a desire to know as much as possible about his heritage. But then, as he became more involved in the civil rights movement, he declared Cassius Clay to be his slave name. And he wanted to separate himself from the dark legacy of American slavery. And hence, he changed his name, and Muhammad Ali was born, which is a great reminder about how our family heritage affects our sense of identity and personhood. And it's so important. It's so important to us, and it's personal, and it can be hard to face in many cases, depending on what we find. And just a side funny, Donald and I were actually on the phone last week, and he said, I don't want to mess anything up, but shouldn't this be called From Clay to Ali? And I said, that's a good point. It actually could be. But as we had turned this in, some of it is we're kind of reverse engineering a story here. So we're going from Muhammad Ali's identity and then trying to trace back through his Clay origins to see, where that takes us. But it's true. It could be either way in this case because of the change that he made. Which brings me to today's session. Our group will be sharing what happens when family story is more closely examined. First and foremost, as oral traditions and narratives are important to document in their original form, or as close as we can get. We then turn to the document trail to prove or disprove elements of the story passed down to us. But of course, when considering African American families, the document trail often goes cold when trying to research backwards, especially pre-1870 census, as we're coming out of slavery. In most cases, slavery was designed to sever family relationships and links. So a lot of times that document trail dies for us. But in the 21st century, we've got DNA. It's coming to our rescue and shedding a lot of light on the relationships and family links that were hidden in the darkness of slavery. So we'll be talking about dissecting the family story for details and research directions, the importance of mining those local archives in order to gather additional documentation, because a lot of times that document trail may die in the traditional methods we're used to, ancestry, family search, all of those. Those archives are going to be the key to finding some of those outlier documents that can really help with your story or help with the details of the story. We're going to talk about organizing the research alongside DNA testers and results, and also keeping DNA limitations in perspective, researching this far back. So let's get started. I'm going to turn to Keith Winstead to share his involvement with this project. And I'll give you a spoiler alert. As Tom mentioned, he's the one that got this party started. And he's been working on this for a long time, wrangling cousins and spit. So let's welcome Keith to tell us more.
Keith, before you jump in, I just want to let our viewers know, thank you so much, Sherry, for running down everything. You're going to have questions, I'm sure, viewers that are watching today. And so please put them in the chat, comment on whatever platform you're viewing on. We're going to get those here. And then towards the end of the presentation, we'll try and address them. You're going to get overwhelmed with lots of good information. I know you will. But we want our presenters, since we've got a good group here, to be able to share their information. And then once they've been able to share, then we'll come back at the end and kind of answer these questions. So the king of clay spit, we're going to give it over to Keith. I've now given you a new nickname. So please share your part of the story and how this has all come about.
My name is Keith Winstead. I'm Muhammad Ali's third cousin. And about 15 years ago, I got a picture from Muhammad Ali's uncle, George Clay, of his grandfather, John Henry Clay, who he said went to the war in Mexico with Henry Clay Jr. Henry Clay Jr. owned John Henry Clay. So I was talking to some other relatives and about a newspaper article that was in the Louisville Courier Journal in 1980, where Muhammad Ali's aunt, Eva Clay Wardell, said that her father told her that he was the grandson of Senator Henry Clay, and that he got in fights because of it, and then I was talking to some other relatives who did genealogy, and they were trying to prove it. And I said, well, the only way you can prove it is to use DNA. And they said, well, since you do that, won't you do it? Won't you do it? So I got Muhammad's brother, Rahman Ali, to do a DNA test. And I got him to do Ancestry, 23andMe, and Family Tree DNA. And Muhammad Ali's DNA is on 23andMe. He did it for medical reasons because of his Parkinson. So then I got Cedric Turner, and then I got Donald there, Donald Shore's the DNA test. And during the pandemic, when the pandemic was really, and everybody was trapped inside, and I'm retired, I had plenty of time to do research. So I got Rahman's DNA and Cedric, and I want to see how many people that they match who are the descendants of Henry Clay's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather. I got over 100 people who are descendants of Henry Clay's father, grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather. Got over 100 of them that when they match Rahman and Cedric, and they follow their tree up, they come to a certain point. Okay. And then we determine, well, the only way we can determine, and they have the same paternal haplogroup, the Clays too. So that's that, if it was different, that would eliminate everything. But we determined the only way we can find out if Rahman and Muhammad are the descendants of Senator Henry Clay is to have them match a direct descendant of Senator Henry Clay. And so we got a guy named Ned, who he is Henry Clay's third great grandson. And I created a chart of Muhammad Ali and going up to Senator Henry Clay, because that's the way it was. It was told that John Henry Clay was Henry Clay's son. So I created a chart of John Henry Clay being the son of Henry Clay, and created a chart of Rahman and Ned, and they match as third cousins once removed, and they match 3.5 centimorgrams when you use GenMatch. And all the other ones who would not have cousins, all the white Clays that Rahman matched, it's a lot higher than that. It's like 12, 13, 14, 15 centimorgrams. And I was wondering why this was so low. But then I realized that they're half cousins now. They're the descendant of Henry Clay and a slave, where these other people that they match are descendant of Henry Clay and his white wife, are Henry Clay's father and our grandfather and their wives. So
and Keith, remind me, there's no surviving direct Y DNA on the white side. Is that correct, from Henry Clay?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. So it makes it tricky, right? Going around different ways. Yeah.
Yeah. But then we got some other Clays who are direct descendant of Henry Clay to do a DNA test. And let's see, we had a Julie did one.
In fact, how many testers, or how many testing accounts do you actually manage in this project?
Oh, about 5,
Oh, okay. Okay.
And then there was some others, direct descendants of Senator Henry Clay. We had 2 others.
Mm-hmm.
Ned did one, and Julie Brock. And then we had, let me see if I can find it.
And in the meantime, you're also researching all of the other Clay lines, because one of the things that with in Clays in Kentucky that we have to understand is that there were a lot of Clay men, and so while we've got the story, we've got the oral narrative passed down to us. It's always still, we still have to do due diligence and research all of the possibilities, which is another thing I'll get into with the organization as well coming up.
Okay. And we also, of course, Rockmond matched Ned on about 18 different chromosomes in different sections on the chromosome.
Nice.
Another indication that it's a strong match.
Nice.
Ned also matched Durian Clay, who is a descendant of John Henry Clay. And Ned matched Wendell Wallace, 5.4 centimorgrams on GenMatch. And Wendell is Donald's cousin.
Yeah.
And also Ned matched Donald, 3.8 centimorgrams.
So what you're seeing, you're definitely seeing a consistent cousin matching in the DNA as well, which is
and two, when you look at the matches of known descendants of Henry Clay, like Ned and Bo and Wendell and Ned and Bo and Julie, they match at about the same percentage of the descendants of John Henry Clay.
Nice.
And they are no half cousins.
Nice. Thank you. That's wonderful. And I know you'll be sharing some more with us as we go along unpacking this story. I'm going to switch next to Donald Shores, and he's going to give you a little bit more of information about how he got started in this project. And he comes to it from a slightly different angle, although he's been right in there with Keith a lot. I mean, for several years now, clearly helping with research and everything. And so take it with Donald.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Donald Shores, and like Tom had mentioned earlier, I am from the Missouri area. I actually got involved with this by happen chance. I was doing some research, like Keith said, back in 2020 when we were all confined. I had been searching my family for years, but had got back into it during the pandemic, got on Ancestry, made a profile, brought the DNA test. One night while doing some research, found a nice profile on my second great grandfather, Squire Clay, who I at the time knew more about than anybody on my Clay side. My last name is Shores, but my dad's mom's name was Elizabeth Clay, so that's my Clay line. So I saw this profile and I didn't recognize the last name, so I reached out to my dad and said, "Hey, Pop, do you know if we're related to any Winsteads?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, it's got the guy's email on there. I'll reach out to him and see what I could find," and wound up being one of the biggest blessings of my life. Since then, almost 3 years ago, Keith has probably become one of my biggest confidants and well-trusted friends, has just been a wealth of information to me. And so he suggested, first of all, he asked me, did I know Wendell Wallace? I was like, yeah, that's my cousin. And he said, well, Wendell matches Rahman Ali. So I'm like, well, who's Rahman Ali? And he went on to advise me that it was Muhammad's little brother. And he said their great grandfather is John Henry Clay. And he said Rahman matches Wendell strong enough for it to match on Ancestry. And he said, I believe, based on some research, that your third great grandfather, Sam, is John Henry Clay's big brother. Well, I had found out that Sam was my third great grandfather because I didn't know for years, but when I found a document, I found my second great grandfather's death certificate, and it listed his parents, Sam and Charity Clay, and it clearly stated that Sam was born in Kentucky, so hence the Clay-Kentucky connection. So during some research, it all started making sense. I found out that Sam was from Kentucky. Also found out that, Keith advised, hey, I think that Henry Clay, Senator Henry Clay, is their father with the slave woman. Well, I go to do some further research, became good friends with Eric Brook, who runs Ashland. found out through doing some research and talking to an author, Lindsay Apple, who has wrote several books about the Clays, that Henry Clay's son, James Brown Clay, came to Missouri in the mid 1830s when he was 17, 18 years old. And that's how I believe that my third great grandfather, Sam, got here to Missouri. And that's where I believe the line from Kentucky to Missouri got here for our family. Sam would be the original black male in our Clay line. Very interested in this. And like I said, I've been working with Keith. I also, like Keith had just advised, match Ned. It's not as high as a match as some experts may say. But what's interestingly enough, like Keith advised, we would be half cousins to these white Clays because it would not be through Lucretia Hart Clay's DNA, it would be through a slave woman. But interestingly enough, I match Julie and Bo very, very high, 72.5 and 75 centigrams. And I actually match them higher than they match Ned. And they all would be blood cousins because all their blood would come from Lucretia Hart Clay as well as Senator Henry Clay. Whereas my blood, we would be half cousins because of my fourth great grandmother would be a slave woman. So this leads me to believe that there are strong, strong possibilities that Henry Clay probably is my fourth great grandfather. And then also I have a cousin on Ancestry that is the son of Henry Clay's brother, John. And it states that our fifth great grandparents would be Henry Clay's mom and dad, John Clay and Elizabeth Hudson. Now, that wouldn't be half cousins. That would be cousins because both of those folks are Caucasian, and me and this cousin are both picking up blood from both of them. So it's been a very, very interesting ride, and just, still it gets interesting and more fascinating every day, the more information. So again, just a blessing to be involved, to have met everybody that's on this panel and be involved today. And like everybody else that's out there, I'm on pins and needles waiting to see what happens the further we go along with this DNA. And what a blessing to have Sherman involved now, who's the expert on the DNA. And I hope to work with him and get as close with him as I am with Sherry, Keith, and Eric, because I think we've got an interesting story to tell, and let's see what happens.
Great, that's fantastic. And yes, I have to say with Donald, he is one of those that is very determined, and he is really quick to pick up a phone and call somebody. He's like, he does never hesitates to reach out to somebody. And the amazing, because of that, so many different directions in the research and connections that he and Keith have been able to make has been really, really impressive. And so that's what is making this project so robust and just it's going to be fantastic by the time we figure all of this out. So, all right. So next we're going to pivot to, we're going to go to Eric Brooks, who is the curator at Ashland, and he's going to give you a lot of background on what is Ashland exactly, and where does he and Henry Clay fit into all of this.
Thank you, Sherry. It's great to be here. Glad to be on this today and speaking with everyone. This is a subject of great interest, as you would imagine, for Ashland, but it really hasn't always been. Ashland has always been concerned with the preservation and presentation of the legacy of Henry Clay. And for a long time, one aspect of that legacy that was not heavily discussed or presented was slavery. And over the years, last 20, 25 especially, we have gone a lot further in that subject, in including material about it in our tours, creating a tour specifically for the purposes of presenting Ashland from the perspective of people Henry Clay enslaved, and of doing much more research to understand who those people were, what their experiences were, and to create descendant communities with people like Don Shores, who are descended perhaps from those people. So that's been very, very important to us and very rewarding as an avenue of research and exploration. As one would imagine, for a long time, the response when people said things like, "Oh, so and so, this person is descended from Henry Clay, and an enslaved woman was." Oh no, that can't be. That didn't happen. Henry Clay didn't do that. Well, the fact is, we now know that such descendants are common. And at a place like Ashland, it would be more surprising to find that there are no descendants of white people at the plantation and the people they enslaved than to find that there are. So we fully believe that over time we can uncover these stories and begin to piece them together, learn about how these things happened and the people involved and resulting from these things. Obviously, we aren't doing that with DNA. We're not DNA researchers. I struggle to keep up with and understand all of the DNA information. I think it's very important, and we hope, as part of this project, to, for the first time, maybe be able to bring DNA results to bear on what we're doing and to our interpretation. But what we can do, instead of focusing on that from our perspective, is to focus on the research that we do, our collection, archival collections that are out there that have information that flesh out these stories. So, for example, John Henry Clay. Who was John Henry Clay? Well, that's a good question. There's a lot that's known from sort of the point that he marries and has kids on downward towards Muhammad Ali. The problem is the other side of that. You run into something called the 1870 gap. And what happens is, in 1870, the U.S. Census for the first time includes black people in their own right, on their own, as individuals and citizens, because that has been what has happened under the Constitution. So you can find records from that point forward with some ease. Going before that, however, is much more difficult because the records tend to be those created by enslavers and therefore reflect these people from the perspective of those who enslaved them. So oftentimes only a first name, and oftentimes only in terms of what they meant to the people enslaving them. So, for example, in John Henry Clay's case, the family story of John Henry Clay going with Henry Jr. to the Mexican War may, in fact, be valid. There is archival evidence to support that. That evidence is 2 documents, the first of which is a will created by Henry Jr. just days before he goes to Mexico. He lists his assets in the will, and one of those assets is an enslaved man named John. Later on, at the war, he writes a letter, Henry Jr. does, back to his family. And in that letter, he talks about John, and says that he's brought John to Mexico and that John has done well in Mexico, and particularly considering that some of his contemporaries, other enslaved men brought as valets by white men, had been killed, he's still alive. So he survived. And he's sending this information home. So we know he's there. We know he's been serving Henry Clay as a valet. We know that up to that point, which was probably almost 2 months before Henry Jr. was killed, he's alive and in camp with Henry Jr. That is the totality currently we have on that individual. So what we can do and what we need to do is to take that information and now look for settlements of Henry Jr.'s will that might mention a disposition of John. Any information we can find perhaps through the U.S. military that might reflect what happened to John after Henry Jr. was killed. There are lots of records about things belonging to Henry Jr. that come back from the battlefield: swords, trunks, pistols, all sorts of things, his body, all that comes back. So it's odd that there is no record presently that talks about John coming back. He would have been a very, very valuable asset to Henry Jr. and to Henry Jr.'s family. And I think they would have wanted to get him back. So we need to look for that. We need to look for records that predate that might show how Henry Jr. came to enslave John. Was he ever in Lexington? Was he at Ashland at any point in time? These might help us understand who he was and give us direction for looking at his line of descent, or ancestry rather, and how that connects to the Clay family. It was all Don also mentioned Henry Clay's brother, John. Here we run into a Clay family problem, which is vast recycling of a very small number of names over and over and over again across a wide number of branches, which means you have to really focus on who you're talking about. But Henry Clay had a brother, John. John lived in New Orleans early in his life, for most of his life. And there are records that show, as a young man, before marrying a white wife, that he essentially took a mixed race wife, had children with that woman, and had a family that he completely abandoned when he married his white wife. So, yes, there are mixed race children of John. We know that. That's pretty documentable. There's a book about these relationships between white men and mixed race women in New Orleans. This was apparently a common thing among young, well-to-do men like John who showed up in New Orleans unmarried and unattached. They would have these relationships and then eventually get married to white women, and those relationships previous would be forgotten. So what we can do is the historical research that will hopefully flesh out these stories and provide direction or understanding for the DNA results that may come through that avenue. So we're very excited about the opportunity. Working with people like Don has been an incredible opportunity, and he is one of several with whom we are working. So we're expanding our story by doing so, and it's really been an amazing experience.
And one little note, one thing that Eric touched on that I found very important, as they approached me with the story as well, one of the things that I did have, you're right, there's that mindset of, you said that it would be more rare for us to find an enslaver or an enslaving family that did not have children with the enslaved women, than it would be to actually find that was way more common. And so when this all first came, into my perspective, I had read, I looked up several Henry Clay biographies and whatnot, and they weren't talking about any of this part of his family. And yet you get to a point where I'm like, okay, was he known for this? And yet in the contemporary records, you are finding that he was very known for it. There's another archive that also had a piece that mentions him fathering children in the newspapers of the time. It's all there. And so you mentioned, Eric, a piece about John Henry. That was that University of Kentucky archive? Is that where that one was that you were mentioning about the mentioning John being with him at the battle? And then also, do you guys have your own archive? Don't you? Your little archive?
We have very few records. Most of what we had was transferred to the University of Kentucky back in about 1992. And that includes the letter that Henry Jr. sends back that mentions John.
Okay.
That's at the University of Kentucky in the Henry Clay Memorial Foundation papers.
Right.
Anybody who wants to see that can do so through the University of Kentucky's website. They have the Special Collections has a website. If you search University of Kentucky Special Collections or Explore UKY, it should bring up a portal through which you can search to find that collection. If you can search Henry Clay Memorial Foundation papers, there's a finding aid. And at this point, many of those documents are now scanned and available online. So you can go right to the document and read it yourself right there on the website.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you can go to UK and read it.
Right. And so another one we got also was from the Filson Historical Society. There's some from the Kentucky Historical Society. So just think about all these little archives, these small little places that were actually, and if you want to look at those online, you usually have to go directly to their site to pull out their digital material instead of, you're not going to find it going to Ancestry or even Family First search. Sorry, Tom. It's not always it's not always in one-stop shopping. You got to go out. So yes, so anyway, very important.
I think that's that just goes to show we tell people all the time, you have to look everywhere. You have to kind of put your feet on the street a little bit, go digging in lots of different places. Hopefully we'll be able to get that link to University of Kentucky to be able to see those papers that have been scanned and things for our audience to look at. And we are getting some questions. We're gonna hold a few of them back as you kind of transition, I think, to the next thing. I think I'll just tell you this in the comments. I think Sherman's going to be a very popular person with just his experience with DNA and with family tree DNA. And so I'll give it to you, Sherry, to kind of kick it over to Sherman.
Okay. When they mentioned too that Sherman was kind of new to this one, you'll have to change the picture out though. I don't have that ability, by the way. for him.
Yeah, let's please bring Annie and Aaron on the back end. We're trying to get all the comments in here, so let's make sure we bring Sherman on.
Actually on. But yeah, Sherman's so new to this, but I have to say it was Roots Tech that brought Sherman and us together for this project. Literally, I attended his session in person. It was live streamed though, so I believe you can probably go back and watch his again, because he was announcing this whole new discovery project, which I will let him talk about. And but I literally, after the session, I walked up and I gave him my card and said, "Hey, you might be interested in this project here." And he came forward. He offered to expand Rahman Ali's testing into the big Y. And so I will take it away, Sherman, because you've got so much you can add to this story.
Thank you for inviting me to speak on this panel. And yeah, we did meet after my presentation at Roots Tech, which is probably still available online. That's where I did like an overview of a new Y-DNA product that we developed called a Discover Tool. And it's a group of products that actually should help Y-DNA testers, mostly big Y testers, kind of figure out how they're related to different people. You can find your time, the most recent common ancestor with other matches, not only other matches, but academic and archaeological samples as well. We've added, updated migrate. Well, we have a new feature we're developing and that we'll release in a couple weeks called like Globetrotter. It's an updated migration map. But one of the biggest features about the Discover tool is like notable connections. And so one of the things about family tree DNA is that we have over 10,000 research projects. Some of them are haplogroup projects, surname projects, etc. So what I typically and what I would like to encourage more researchers, especially African American researchers, to start is to maybe do a Google search on some surnames that you're researching, because it's quite possible that we have a project there for a family tree DNA that if you delve into the project, you may even see some of the names that you're researching. So that's one of the things that I would like to encourage more researchers to do, is to utilize the database for the DNA projects. And so, yeah, it was pretty awesome meeting you at the Roots Tech and kind of talking about this in more depth. And so I was thankful to be a part of this and test Rahman's DNA. But I think in terms of I think what makes this pretty, I think the finest connection is doable. It's just a number of parameters that you have to consider. For example, the average African American is 20 to 25% European, and 40% of African American men that do Y-DNA testing come back with a European haplogroup. So therefore, if we're utilizing autosomal DNA to solve this puzzle, it can become a bit convoluted, so to speak, because autosomal DNA breaks down with every generation. You're losing half of that DNA with every generation. And so therefore, your matches might not always lead you back to where you think this should be, only because of the parts of the DNA that might have been tested. And other things to consider would be that it's actually possible that the connection could be further back than what we might have expected it to be, just based off of DNA. And so, but I think utilizing other avenues like of testing, like Y-DNA testing, which looks at the father's line going back thousands of years. So myself as a genealogist, to solve this puzzle, I would probably, if I had the means, I would probably look for a direct descendant from both lines. And so, as we have mentioned earlier, all throughout this process, this presentation, is that there are no direct male descendants for Henry Clay who tested. And in that regard, I would probably utilize the research projects again, because we actually have a Clay research project here. And so I would kind of expand my umbrella a bit more, because we're still following that genetic signature going back hundreds and hundreds of years. So therefore, although we might not have a direct descendant from Senator Clay, if we go back in time, we might find some second and third cousins of his who've tested in our database. And so from that standpoint, we should be able to still get a genetic signature for the senator. And so if you testing one person who believes that they are direct descendant from the senator, and if we're looking back at Senator Clay's family, his other more distant relatives, they still, if the connection is true, then everybody would see each other on their match list, and so that's what ultimately we'll be able to see once we get further along in this research process.
So when you mentioned Clay Project, is that like the surname studies that Family Tree DNA has had for years? And that's one thing I want to point out to people is that, I mean, not to diss other companies, but you guys are the oldest one out there, and you guys have been doing those DNA studies, those surname studies for a really long time. I remember, oh gosh, 15 or so years ago. I remember they've always been up there for free. People had to opt in to be part of a study. But is that what you're talking about when you talk about Clay Project? Is that kind of, or is it getting bigger now? Are other projects now getting bigger?
Yeah, they are. I mean, they're expanding because you have more interest. So I am talking about the Clay DNA Research Project hosted by Family Tree DNA. And so that's where we have some researchers who are interested in the Clay lineage as well, because even the researchers of that project, they're starting to find out that there's different branches of Clay. So we have the Senator Clay from Kentucky, but there was also another Senator Clay who had a son who he's more notable. They called him General Clay. And so the General Clay, his father, they thought that they were related, but they have two separate haplogroups. The Senator Clay from Kentucky haplogroup is R, and the General Clay's line is actually a North African EM35 haplogroup, and their direct descendant was a convict that came into the United States, I think in the 1700s, or something. So I even learned more just reaching out and speaking to them, and so now that I meet more African descendant Clays who they also have an inclination that they may be a descendant from the Henry Clay from Kentucky as well. So we're going to form another type of research project where we're going to dig into their DNA a bit more to see if we can confirm or deny some of the things that have been passed down, because I think with our family, especially enslaved families, we see our relative maybe in 1870 as mulatto, or on a census record. And so looking at the naming patterns, we could a lot of times we automatically assume that we're the direct descendant of the slave master. Right. But what DNA and kind of teaching us is that it's not always the slave master. It could have been his overseer, could have been his son, his grandson, could have been his cousin, neighbor. Our family were looked at as chattel, as property. And so we don't necessarily know who all had access to those women. Right. And unfortunately, they all could have had access to her, and so she might have gotten pregnant, but she might not have even known who the kid's father was.
And in fact, Tom, if you want to bring the rest of the folks on board, we're really excited. I mean, clearly, like I said, Sherman and I just met at RootsTech 2023 in Salt Lake City, so we're just and he has upgraded Rahman's Y test, so that has went through. But like you said, there's so many different branches for us to be researching on his end. I mean, he's got way more clays than probably we've collected now. And but he brought up to naming traditions, and that's really important because you look at the name of Cassius Clay being passed down, and there is a very prominent historical figure also named Cassius Clay in Kentucky who was related to Henry Clay, and was actually I won't go on the bandwagon of full abolitionism, but leaning more towards that way. And so look at someone like Muhammad Ali being born as Cassius Clay. Is he more, what you expected him to be more tied to Cassius Clay, but yet his family tradition is that he's from Henry Clay. And so as far as what surname they took, again, it could be for many, many reasons. And we're kind of opening the floor here. We've only got about 10 more minutes. And so we're opening the floor. Let's dig into that a little bit. And then I know we're going to also have some time. Tom's going to bring us some questions and such. So yeah.
Jump in. One of the questions, sorry, I'm going to kind of direct this back to Sherman. You had said something that I just want to clarify or make sure that our audience understands. Cheryl Brown asked the question about kind of DNA testing finds more European DNA than African DNA. What would you say in the work that you're specifically doing? Is that true?
Yeah, that's definitely true because Europeans, they are far more into DNA testing than African Americans. I quite often say we as African Americans are about 10 years behind in terms of, especially DNA testing. They just got a head start on us, and so a lot of times, so we're kind of still doing autosomal DNA a lot, African Americans, but at some point in time, this is why I always encourage African Americans to start branching out because we're the most genetically diverse people in the world and we have this, just genetic gaps in our DNA that we can start filling by everybody just kind of doing their part. And I also mentioned again, like if 4 out of 10 African Americans men that do a Y-DNA test, they're going to come back with a European haplogroup anyhow, and that's just as a result of slavery. So the answer is definitely a yes for that. It's definitely more European men, but even with African Americans, they're still a lot of them are still going to come back with European haplogroups as well.
And is Family Tree DNA the only DNA company that's doing this testing that relates to this project? Are there other DNA companies or tests that can be used to show these connections and potentially, some of our audience's connections to the Clay family?
I mean, it's possible you could use other databases, but we're the only company that does extensive Y-DNA testing, like Big Y DNA, and that also provides you with matches. So there's some other companies out there that you can do a Y-DNA test with, but we have the largest SNP or the largest Y-DNA database in the world. So therefore, it's you typically may get some better information back by testing with us with our company in terms of doing Y-DNA. But we also, we have loads of group projects there. We have over 10,000 group projects that are led by researchers. So they're haplogroup projects, surname projects, geographical projects, and all of them can be used in conjunction with your research. And so we accept autosomal transfer. So if you have tested with 23andMe, Ancestry, etc., you can actually transfer into our company for free, and we'll provide you with matches for free. And so that's one of the things that I wanted to do with this project. Actually, it's kind of get more testers into the database to see how we can further untangle some of the webs that exist even with this Clay connection right here.
And actually, yes, that's really important. One of the strategies that Keith has used has been I know some of the folks that have joined in, they tested with multiple companies, and part of that strategy too is that you can take those tests and you can feed into Family Tree DNA, but again, you can't get that Y unless you go that direction. Ancestry is a large pool that can match you, but again, Family Tree DNA has a lot of that surname study and all that, and the Big Y as well. I can only imagine what Sherman's organization looks like on that side. You guys have something professional, I'm sure, that's very large and complicated. For us on this side, I know I promised I would touch on organization, and one of the things that we've been doing, Keith started with an online sharing platform for some of those charts that he's put in, and then I came along and started putting some of the various Clay branches and then pulling in the testing as well into Airtable. Airtable is a free product that you guys can use. There's been several people at Roots Tech that have presented on that, and those are actually in the Roots Tech On Demand classes. In fact, I've got one myself, and that's really, really handy. So yeah, just look for me. You can actually go watch that. And Nicole Dyer has been doing one, I know, on DNA and using Airtable and tracking that, which I want to get into more. I haven't really got into that a lot. But again, it's, you think about how complicated this is with so many branches of the Clay family and so many testers and how they're testing. And again, I'm actually one that, sorry, DNA is really not my strong point. So trying to match that kind of thing and make sense out of it. This is why we pull in so many people to help, because we need the help. We need people that are in that wheelhouse to really make sense of all this. And yeah.
The good. I think Don was trying to say something.
I think
he might be on mute.
The good thing about doing this matching direct descendants of Senator Henry Clay is that you can, when they come together, like Ned and Rockmont come together in Senator Henry Clay, that eliminates any of Henry Clay's brothers. if it was if they were descended of Henry Clay's brother, when you triangulate and come to a common person, it would come to Henry Clay's brother. But Ned and all the direct descendants of Henry Clay, when you triangulate and create the tree, they all come together as Senator Henry Clay.
I mean, I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you about
Please,
to speak?
Please, Sherman, respond.
Oh, well, I mean, I mean, that tells me as a genealogist, as someone that studies DNA, that yeah, there's definitely a clear-cut connection to the Clay family, but I don't think that it truly confirms it because of the other mitigating factors involved with that. So it's kind of getting you into that area. The DNA is, but it's going to take a bit more to truly, confirm that. So that's where Y-DNA will actually confirm everything. If I'm testing a direct male from this side of the family, I test one from this side of the family.
Yeah,
it's like
that's why we had Rockman do the big Y. But the thing about it, when you look at his matches, there are no direct descendants of Senator Henry Clay. And matter of fact, I don't see any direct descendants of Henry Clay's father, grandfather, or great-grandfather who took the Y-DNA. All the ones that I see that Rockman matches the Y-DNA, most of them are in Europe.
Yeah. That's why I don't know how much I can speak on this. But I mean, and that's why I also believe that we as African Americans, we see, like the naming patterns, we know who he's enslaved by. But I don't think that we also consider the other people, other men that might have had access. Without a doubt, you have a connection to the Clay family. You were enslaved by them. But like, I don't know if we always, as researchers, consider like maybe it could have been a slave. Or, I'm sorry, the overseer or someone that it might have been impregnated. It could have been multiple people that could have did it. And so that's why I do believe Y-DNA is like the end all be all. Either if you take a Y-DNA test, you should, if you're a direct descendant from the Clays, then, they should theoretically show up because we are able to trace them back to like their ancestor that came here in the 1700s. And so
you see, there's no direct male descendant of Senator Henry Clay with the last name Clay. So,
so I think this goes to Sherry's point. And Sherry, you kind of sent us an email, in preparation for this. And one of the things you pointed out was kind of the need for maybe a prominent, nationally known genealogist to analyze all the results, to really look in detail at all these things. Someone maybe that comes from the outside a little bit, someone that's not just necessarily taking the oral tradition, which can fluctuate, or the records that tell the story that wanted to be told through the records, but actually look at the DNA, look at all of it in aggregate, and then reveal it. Your background as a TV producer, I know there's to make this into kind of a big film reveal or a television project. Really to make this connection and see if all points to the same conclusion. And so I think you want to speak to that just a little bit, kind of your plea as we kind of wrap up and end today's session.
Yeah, I think C.C. Moore at one time they were thinking about hiring her to verify. And
we wrote through it.
So it's out there. She got name dropped.
I have to say, I apologize, Cece, if you ever see this, because Cece is the one talking to me, and we kind of ghosted her a little bit. Long story, I actually left to the previous place of my employment, and so therefore we didn't have anybody doing the project, right? So it's potential that we have somebody coming up soon that's going to be doing that. And so, yes, but it's like we didn't want to waste her time until we're actually ready to move forward with the project. We know, yes, we'd want someone top of the line like that, as long as we can afford her. I know she's rather expensive, but a top name in the field to do that forensic genealogy study that we need to do this with. And yeah, absolutely. And so we've got a really great team so far, and we're making a lot of strides along the way. We're building more, and now we've got Sherman on board too. It's helping us kind of, dig into that connection that goes so far back, as he talked about how how the DNA has with each generation down and how difficult that is. And so we've got a lot of work still to do, and we hope to have some additional announcements or news for you coming up soon.
Well, thank you all for Keith, for Eric, for Donald, for Sherman, for Sherry. Thank you so much for this lively discussion. We've got more questions than we can answer. Hopefully some of you maybe can jump off of the stream and go to our Facebook page to see some of the questions that should be pretty easy to answer. I know there's some about where to get testing or how to transfer data, things like that. But thank you so much for introducing us to this fascination. And I do like the idea, Sherry, like you said, Clay to Ali, maybe. I don't know.
Right, exactly.
Thanks everyone for watching. Thank you for your participation. Hopefully you learned as much as I did from listening to this distinguished group of people. We're going to take a break. Hopefully we'll come back for some of the next series of classes this afternoon. But hope you got something really that's worthwhile and helps you as you further your family history discoveries now using DNA. Thanks everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.